Well, good afternoon, all of our viewers and supporters, and welcome to another Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center author live stream. It's our last one of the year. So, as always, we want to thank Southwest 66 Credit Union for making all of these author features possible this year. So, thank them for making all these author interviews possible for our 2024 author live streams. Today, we are so excited to welcome Miss Elinor Lipman, which is the author of Miss Demeanor. But she's also written several other authors, and some of them have even have been created into movies. So we are so excited to have you, Elinor. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, let's get right into it because we only have 30 minutes. But why don't you start off by introducing yourself and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Okay, sure. I live in New York City right now, but I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is used to be famous for being a mill town and still has that reputation. So when I tell people I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts, there's usually a little bit of a silence. But I go back there as often as I can. And they created 3 years ago an Elinor Lipman Prize, the library did. An Elinor Lipman Prize, a writing prize. So that was a great honor. So I grew up, in a little house on Cascade Avenue. I'm the youngest of two and a very functional family. My parents got married late and had us late, so they're very devoted parents. And in college, I went to college in Boston, didn't take writing courses. And it wasn't until when I was 28 and working, I was working for a union, for the Mass Teachers Association, MTA, NEA. And I just got this idea I'd like to try fiction. So I signed up for an adult ed course at Brandeis University, which was about maybe a 20-minute ride from where I lived in Newton. And when the night came, I got cold feet. And I said, I don't know if I want to do this. I haven't written fiction. Plus, where do I park? And all that stuff. But I paid $40 for 10 weeks. This would be back in 1978, I think. So I wasn't going to throw $40 away. And I went to that course, and and what attracted me to the course was it wasn't, come to this course and write a novel. It was, we'll start with exercises, and I felt that I could do that. So every week, the teacher would say, here's the exercise. Two people are talking to each other, and then switch the conversation or something like that. So he kept asking, and finally one week he said, does anyone still need an exercise? And I was the only one who raised my hand. So he said, no more. I want you to write a fiction, was the way he put it. So I struggled, and I wrote 4 pages, turned it in. He read it, and the next week he said, well, write some more, finish it. And that's how I started with that short story that never saw the light of day. But my first book was a collection of short stories. And then, because in that short story, there were 7 connected stories about a couple named Tim and Hannah who met at the DMV, at the motor vehicle agency, and met when she was about 9 months pregnant. And so I thought, well, if I can write 7 connected stories, I think I'll try a novel. And then my first novel was called Then She Found Me. And that's the only book. That was the book that got made into a movie.
Fabulous. So, as you know, we're an adult literacy organization. That's our primary focus here. Why is, I know you have background in education. Why is adult literacy or literacy in general an important topic to you?
Well, of course. I mean, what would I do if people couldn't read? Well, and actually, I say that as someone who listens to audiobooks all the time. So that's kind of a new wrinkle. But obviously, as an author, what do I do for a living? I write books. So it's very, very important. But I'm just interested in the topic of literacy, especially switching from languages. My mother didn't speak English until she went to kindergarten, not speaking English. And it's always, and even though she retained that the family, what her parents spoke. Her parents were immigrants. So she's still growing up, she knew how to speak Yiddish, but she had to learn English. And so I always imagine her, this, scared little girl going off to kindergarten, not speaking English. And, so just obviously literacy. And I also, have friends who, before there was such a thing as dyslexia being diagnosed, it was just, trouble reading and not understanding, and people thought they were stupid. And anyway, so just very sympathetic and interested in the topic.
I know you took some, adult education courses in fiction writing, but what inspired you to dig into writing? We always ask our authors, and they always have interesting avenues that led them to become led them to writing.
Yeah, what happened was I was working full time, as I said, for the Mass Teachers Association, and it was a writing job. I was writing up news pieces about arbitrations and collective bargaining and contracts, but I also did features. And I started just kind of looking around, even in the office. I remember there was a woman whose story kind of surprised me. I can even tell you what the story was. I'll be quick. It was a woman, and we used to walk together from the bus stop. We'd get off work together and walk. She lived somewhat near me, and she was a widow of, literally would go to the cemetery every week and put flowers on her husband's grave. And she had 2 grown sons, and it was all very touching. So I had sort of in my mind painted a picture of her as what kind of marriage it was. And then later I found out that her husband had died of alcoholism. Now that happens, of course. I'm not, it happens in the best of families, but it was such a change from her demure, sweet, well-behaved religious life. So I started thinking, never wrote about this, but it made me start to think in terms of writing about people's lives. And not that the ideas come easily. I generally start with just an opening line and take it from there. But I would just say, and in college, I have to say, I wrote kind of humor pieces. So they were humorous essays. So I think that gave me a little head start.
So does humor come easily to you? Writing about humor versus some others like, I find it easier to write about horror or about biographies, or does writing comedy
part of it is okay. So this is always something I get asked. People ask me things like, do you laugh when you're writing? And I'll say, no. In fact, if I feel that I'm making a joke, that I'm going for a joke, I cut that line. Because what I discovered over the course of my writing books, and it took a while before I realized, like, I would do a reading in public at a bookstore, usually a library, and I would read a sentence and people would laugh, and I'd think, to me, it was just a line that was an observation, something I thought, something I saw, and people would laugh. So I thought, well, this is interesting, and I'm not going to fight it. And of course, at the next book sure if people didn't laugh at that same line, I would be disappointed. But so don't aim to be funny, but if it, and it probably sounds vain and narcissistic to say that it comes naturally, but I think it's just a way I have of at looking at things that other people find funny. And once I was reading, and in the middle of a reading, I asked, the audience laughed, and I stopped and I said, "No, why was that funny?" And a woman said, "I think it was a laugh of recognition. And I think that defines a comedy of manners." So,
it just when you're speaking about this reminds me of the show Seinfeld. It's just
oh,
so
what a
they say
compliment.
about nothing, but it's just like their day-to-day life, but it's funny and you can relate to it, because I'm like, I've had those situations too, and but they're
Yeah,
just living their life, but it's humorous because it's like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
like this the
I can give you an
guy
exact,
and
like the exact moment where I realized that things, sometimes what I find poignant and touching, other people found funny. And what it was, in one of my books called The Dearly Departed, a mom is her son, who is a policeman, and he was fine. He had on a bulletproof vest, but you can even be a little bit bruised from being hit with. Okay, so he was in the hospital overnight, and she is there the next day, and he's essentially saying, I don't know how many of you have sons, but like he's essentially saying, "No, Mom, I'm fine, I'm coming home." So I'm coming home now, and she says, no, he's in the hospital. She says, "Should I strip the bed?" Now, to me, it meant, first of all, she probably has led a very healthy life without anyone being in the hospital. It also meant, it said something about her. It said sort of, didn't know much about hospitals, wasn't used to be waiting on. She would always strip the own bed. So I sent it to my dear friend, an author named Mamie Medwed. She read every chapter as I wrote it. And she called me up and she said, "Oh, that was hysterical." And I said, what was hysterical? And when she said, "Should I strip the bed?" And I learned at that moment that was a very good example of what I find poignant, what I meant to help the reader know the character, and that she was, it was an insight into her point of view and everything that, yeah, I never knew that was hysterical, but, yeah.
So is that how you kind of develop and form your characters? Is that you take somebody that and if they have you take a little part of their story and develop a character out of that, and
I learned my lesson. I don't do that. I'll tell you, my first published story, I forget which, it was first or second, no, and it was in Yankee Magazine, and I was, completely thrilled. And it was the last time I wrote about someone's personality and character, because it was a woman I knew, and everyone knows this woman. She apologized for everything, and she also, like, if she came to your house, even just dropping by, she felt she had to bring a gift. So I was fascinated by this woman and about her need to always do right and be good, unnecessary gifts. And for example, I would meet her in the supermarket, and I would ask how she is, how everything was. She'd write me a thank you note. I'd get a thank you note in the mail a couple of days later. So I think all of us know thank you notes are wonderful, not really necessary. So I wrote a story about someone like this, who was so helpful, obsequious even. Okay, so that got published. It was safe to write it because it was only a story from my workshop at Brandeis. So that was safe. She wasn't in it. It got published in Yankee Magazine. She didn't see it. Then it got chosen for, wouldn't you know, Yankee magazines, anthology of favorite stories. So it was like, oh, she didn't see it. Then I had my first book was a short story collection, and they wanted to put that story in. So I wrote, the legal department vets everything. And I said, well, I can't use that one because it's really about a person and she'll recognize herself. And they said, this is the most recognizable character in the entire book. Everyone knows someone who goes overboard,
Uh-huh.
and so overboard. And writes unnecessary, gives unnecessary presents and thank you notes. So it went in the book, and my friend saw it. And that's the last time she ever talked to me. And she sent me an invoice. I got a bill.
Oh my.
And I didn't know what to do. So I called my agent, the person who like deals with your business. And she said, just don't do anything. Don't ignore that. And that was the end. Oh, learned my lesson. So I don't steal a person. And even if I am stealing, a friend of mine wore this really beautiful red suede suit at her son's bar mitzvah. And I called her up and asked permission for a character of mine to wear a red suede suit. Yeah.
And so how do you develop your characters now then?
Oh, that's a very good question. Because I don't outline, I just, introduce a character. First, I have to think, what did they do? I just finished my 15th novel. So I'm running out of like professions, jobs. So, have I had a teacher? I've had a lawyer. I've had doctors. What do I do? So I first start with a name and a situation, not even a situation, but what do they do? And then I just write the first page. And then there might be something on the first page that gives me another idea. And maybe I make it through 2 or 3 chapters, and then I say, wait a minute, I don't know anything about this character's background. So I might go back and write. This happened in The Dearly Departed, where I went back and gave her a job where she worked at a school, and she had to leave that for reasons having to do with inappropriate behavior by a male teacher. So I make it up as I go along, and then I get to know the character better. So it's like self-development. I think I'm a good critic and a good editor of my own work. Like, I need more of this. I'm going down an alleyway. I'm going to cut that and go back to the truest point in the chapter. Maybe I've cut 165 pages out of the book.
So how the book of the day, Miss Demeanor,
Misdemeanor.
Misdemeanor. I'm sorry.
Play on, it's a play on the legal term, misdemeanor. Yeah.
Yes, because she's, not to give a lot away, but the main character is an attorney. So, but how did you come up with the idea for this book in particular?
Let's see. I had this idea that I end up throwing away. I had this idea about someone, and maybe she worked for a cookbook author, and she was a recipe tester. No, don't anyone get turned off by that, because I didn't use it. So then I had this other idea. I like my characters. I don't like my characters to be like successful, like in The Devil Wears Prada. It was made into a movie, and someone calls the women in high heels clackers, like these professional women in Madison Avenue, New York offices. Like, I like to bring my characters improve their life. I like to make them happy. I like, happy endings and stuff like that. So her name is Jane. Jane was she's an identical twin, and her sister is successful and kind of bossy. So she's a dermatologist, and the sister thinks, well, I went to a conference and someone had a blog about skin and food and what you eat and what's good for your skin. Maybe you could do that. So I write that chapter, which is gone, but I write that chapter. And at the end, out of nowhere, this happens. Out of nowhere, I wrote the sentence, which the timing was good because I was under house arrest. So I thought, well, that could be fun. And, a little bit, COVID, we've kind of all experienced house arrest. And the legal term is home confinement anyway. So, I got rid of that other stuff. And then I had to come up with a crime that would would be small enough that would earn her 6 months of home confinement, yet but she would still be sympathetic to the readers. I didn't want the readers to think she was, like a criminal. So I talked to my friend Jimmy Mulligan. I went to high school with Jimmy Mulligan, junior high. I've known him since 4th grade. He was just a cop on the beat, and then he became superintendent in a couple of Massachusetts towns and police commissioner and all this stuff. So I called Jimmy Mulligan, or email him every time I have a cop in my book. So I called Jimmy to ask him for a crime. And he said something that happens more than you think can be indecent exposure. So indecent exposure is a polite term. So let me just say, to be polite, on the private terrace of her building. So, in New York, that is not something, except that, it's hardly ever going to get you arrested. But a bitter woman across the street was watching with binoculars and called. Okay. So I had to make it, I felt that was not, that wouldn't turn even the strictest readers off. And apparently it hasn't turned people off.
It's more humorous than anything.
It's over in the first chapter. It's even over in like page 2. But, and then it's dealing with that. And then her doorman, in New York, most buildings have doorman. Her doorman, when everything's confidential, the doorman's not supposed to talk about the comings and goings of other people. But, you get favorite doorman, and they have favorite tenants. And I had her doorman sort of clue her in that someone else in the building was also wearing an ankle monitor. and that's Perry.
And then that's where the story begins.
Yeah.
So you just it's kind of a free flow of ideas, and you just kind of put them all together and create a book.
I do. And, about 2/3 or even 3/4 of the way through the book, I say to myself, okay, you've thrown that ball up in the air. Now you can't just walk away. You have to bring that down again. And how it's usually a character that I've introduced and then maybe not done anything with. And then I say to myself, how can I bring them back into the book in a way that seems like it was a good idea in the first place? So that, there are a lot of characters like that in Ms. Demeanor that serve a purpose.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about the book that was made into a movie. How how did that process come about? And did you enjoy the process?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, it's a long story in terms of years, not in terms of, I can make it a brief story. It was my first novel, first book with short stories. It was my first novel. And before it even came out, the phone rang, and those were in the days where they would send out manuscript to people in Hollywood. And an agent called and said, how would you feel on this miserable rainy day to know that Sigourney Weaver loves your book? So, I was flabbergasted. I mean, I knew books became movies. I knew that Godfather was a book. I knew that Mary Poppins started off as a book, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't even know that it was being shopped around. So sure enough, Sigourney Weaver, Ghostbusters, other famous movies, the verb they use is option, meaning a contract. A contract is signed. So I pick my son up at school. He's 6 years old. He's in first grade. And I say, Mummy's book, Sigourney Weaver is going to make Mummy's book into a movie. He knew who Sigourney Weaver was because he'd seen Ghostbusters 1. So he said, and it's one of my favorite lines, he said, you're not doing this for the money, are you? First grader. And anyway, it took 18 years for the movie to come out. 18 years. And that 6-year-old at, let's see, 1860, at 25 or 6 by the time the movie came out, it ended up being made by Helen Hunt and not Sigourney Weaver. Helen Hunt wrote it, directed it, starred in it, changed the book a great deal, but I loved it. Colin Firth, Matthew Broderick, Bette Midler. At the book party, after the premiere, then I brought my son over to meet Helen Hunt, and my son, he put his arm around my shoulder and he said to her, I hope you know you've made my mother's decade.
Sweet
to do with this script. I got to read it and I made one suggestion. That was it. But it was a fun thing, and
it didn't bother you. You know how a lot of books, when they're turned into movies, the script gets changed quite a bit sometimes. Did that part bother you at all?
It didn't. I'll tell you what, I'd been prepared. A good friend of mine, the novelist Meg Wolitzer, had said to me, let me explain what this means. It means the movie will be a movie based on a character suggested by the novel such and such. And I think if it had been a crappy, cheap movie, I mean, it was cheap in the sense that it was an indie movie and not a big budget, but it was beautifully done. And I love the story and the character. Well, her story, Helen Hunt's story, and Colin Firth was the romantic hero, and Bette Midler was the birth mother. It was about a birth mother finding her daughter when the daughter's an adult. And so I would say I was prepared for it. And I did love the movie. If it had been cheapened and made into, stuff that, just things that had been added to appeal to, I don't know.
Completely changed it.
Teenagers. Yeah. It was very nice. It was very nice. And she found it.
Good. Well, I'll have to check out the movie tonight and watch it and see. Good. I
think you can
get it. And then I'll have to go back and read it. I usually read the book and then watch the movie, and then I'm disappointed by the movie most of the time, but we'll see what happens this time.
Yeah.
Well, what do you hope is the biggest takeaway that readers take from all of your stories and any of your stories?
I'm glad you asked that, because I do. It's I want some of the best compliments that I've never forgotten is, like, for example, someone told me at a reading, and I know we're running out of time. Someone came up to me at a reading and she said, my mother had cancer, and she said her mother was dying. And she said, I brought her home and I put her in a room right off the living room. And I gave her a copy of Isabel's Bed. That was my third or fourth novel. And she said, and I could hear her laughing from the next year. And, I just felt that was one of the best compliments. I want someone, I want them to be able to feel like these characters are their friends, and that they come away very satisfied. That it's that I and the other thing is, I don't like reading books. I just read this book that got nice reviews. What happens at the end? Not my book. The guy, old boyfriend, it doesn't work out when they get back together. He jumps off the mountain, literally. I don't want that. Nobody jumps off mountains. I want people to be satisfied. I like happy endings. I like it to make people happy, make them feel better.
And you can relate to them, relate to some of the characters.
As an escape, when people have said, I was in the hospital and I got books on, healing and on diet and blah, blah, blah. But the book that meant the best to me was, one of your books, and it made me happy. So, it means a lot. I like people to get lost in the books. And once, a woman told me, it was a bookseller, and I met her at a conference, and she said on the ride up from North Carolina to New York for the conference, she read The Inn at Lake Divine. That was that's probably my best known book. She read The Inn at Lake Divine 23 times in a row on the ride up.
Oh, wow.
So that was, that was a big compliment. I like that a lot. I wish I knew who she was now. I'd write her a letter again.
Well, I have to say, this book is it made me laugh a lot. So that's good. If a book makes me laugh or makes me cry, it's always one of my top books. And so I know you said you're working on your 15th book, but are there any other projects that you're currently working on?
The 15th book, which is called Every Tom, Dick, and Harry, will be out in February. I like when people laugh at the title. That just went to bed yesterday. I literally sent back the copy edited manuscript. Now, it sounds like I didn't, then I sat down and started the new one. There's a pause while you're waiting for your editor to edit it, and then the copy editor to edit it. So I have 3 pages of the next book. So that's it. But as far as other projects, my projects tend to be writing books. So, and
wonderful.
Cook and I bake, just like Jane, my character. So yesterday I finished it. I finished the copy edited, sent it in, and made some bread.
All right. And so where can people get more information about your book? I know they're sold anywhere where books are sold, Barnes and Noble,
and any place online, and if it's always good to get at a bookstore. Bookstores, a book comes out and they buy if they have a few copies and so on. But any bookstore will order it for you. It's out in paperback. So all of the online Barnes and Noble and Amazon and whatever else. And
I'd like to promote independent bookstores. So if you can purchase it at your independent bookstore, we would prefer that. But they're available everywhere.
And they'll get it for you, because even if they look blankly at the computer and say we don't have it, then you just say, could you order it for me? And libraries, but my website, you just Google me, or my website is my name, www.elinorlipman.com.
And where can people get information about you? On your website? Are you on the socials?
Yes. I am. I'm both Instagram. I don't do Twitter much, because so many authors. It's like 100% self-promotion, and they have a book coming out, and every single day it's another thing about where they were and what they did. So I don't love to do that. You have to kind of do it. But yes, Instagram is just under my name, and Facebook is under my name. I'm doing something tonight if you're on Facebook, it's called Library Love Fest. One word, Love Fest on Facebook.
Love Fest.
Library Love Fest, and it's with 3 other authors. And we are all have books coming out in winter or spring. So the books aren't out yet. So I don't know what we'll be talking about, the books that aren't out yet about writing or something like that. But yeah,
Well,
easy
we'll
to.
make sure and share that on our comments after the
Oh,
show, so people can check that out this afternoon and listen to you and the other two authors.
okay, great.
And finally, because we love reading here at PBALC, we think it's an important part of our students' learning. What Give us 3 books that you are currently reading and some the recommendations.
I will. I wrote these down. Amazingly, as I said, I'm always I'm doing an audiobook. Today I started one because I needed a new one. So one that was available through my library was about the memoir by Henry Winkler, the TV star that
Uh-huh.
and I didn't know I'd be interested, but I heard he was smart. So I start listening. It's called Bing Henry. And I was astonished. I mean, first of all, he even in college, he couldn't read. He wasn't
Mhm.
diagnosed as being dyslexic till he was 34. And his parents were German refugees, and they were constantly, and they wanted him to be smart and get good grades, and he was constantly being grounded and he
Mhm.
managed to get into college, but he
It was a
and
struggle.
it was unbelievable how he loved acting, but even when he tried out for Yale Drama School, he thought he would never ever ever get in, and he had to do a passage from Shakespeare, and when he got there for the presentation, it flew out of his head. And he said he made up stuff that sounded like Shakespeare and he got in. But it's very inspiring to be diagnosed until you're 34, and people are
Mhm.
always calling you stupid, and your parents are always, sending you to your room, and you're like, no television, no this or that. So I thought it was kind of an amazing thing to be opening today, but I think really well written. Oh, so other favorite books. My all-time favorite book is probably Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre, and I love this book. Um, if somebody would want a book that is about sports, a friend of mine wrote this, and it's one of the best books. It's called "In These Girls, Hope is a Muscle," and why this is so
Hmm.
inspiring. It was the
It was
girls,
the
the
girls in
high school.
high school.
I'm getting a feedback here. A high school girls basketball team, Amherst Regional, Massachusetts, Amherst Pelham Regional High School. And the girls went from, got a new coach and moved
Mhm.
on to become state champions. And
Wow.
it's just one and it was named a few years ago as one of the Sports Illustrated named it one of the top 100 book about sports of all times. But it's just a great read, and it's in paperback by Madeline Blaze. If you get Blais is her last name, you can find it. In These Girls, Hope is a Muscle. And I also do. Do you need more? That's a lot, isn't it?
That's 3. Those are really good recommendations, Eleanor. Thank you so much. I didn't realize that Henry Winkler had released a book. So we follow him because I know that he had dyslexia, and he's
Oh,
a very he promotes literacy a lot. So
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
And just miraculously started it today because I was forcing myself to go on the treadmill in my building. And I thought, new book, Town from New Book. It was available on the New York Public Library audio site. And I thought, I think that got good reviews. And from the beginning, I was spellbound.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you again, Eleanor, for joining us. It was wonderful conversing with you and talking about your books and your life. And so make sure and everybody check Eleanor out on social media, her website, and later this evening, if you can log on to another one of her
Yeah.
pictures.
Live,
And then make sure live stream and then make sure and check out the movie Then She Found Me. Is that correct? Is the
yes.
name of the book that was made into a movie. All of her books are available now except for the one that is going to be released this winter. And just as a reminder to everyone, we're giving away at the end of this month, because it's National Literacy Month this month, Elinor, we're giving away a bundle of books from each of our featured authors that we had this year. So Miss Demeanor is going to be part of that bundle. So be looking out for that. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a fabulous week. And thank you again, Elinor, for joining us. And we'll see everybody.
Welcome. You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. We'll see everybody next time. Thank you for watching.